There is a specific kind of love that does not require anything to sustain it. Not the love that burns bright in comfortable circumstances and dims when the circumstances become difficult. Not the love that is generous when generosity is easy and withholding when it costs something. Not the love that is performing itself for an audience, for the family that is watching, for the community that is judging, for the version of the relationship that will be told at gatherings years from now when the people who attended it have grown into the people they were going to become. The other kind. The kind that simply continues. That wakes up in the difficult morning and makes breakfast. That manages the household on what is available without requiring the person who is loved to apologize for what is not available. That sits with the person who is quiet rather than requiring them to perform being fine. That carries its own disappointments in the interior space where a person keeps the things that belong only to them and does not deploy those disappointments as currency in the ordinary negotiations of a shared life. This is the hardest kind to find. Not because people are selfish, most people are not predominantly selfish, but because the kind of love that does not require anything to sustain it requires the person who loves to have arrived at a settled understanding of their own value that does not depend on what they receive. That is rare. It requires a specific kind of interior work, the kind that is done alone in the hours that are not witnessed, in the specific quiet of a person sitting with what they have and deciding that what they have is sufficient, that who they are does not depend on what the love returns. Most people have not done this work. Most people have not needed to. Most people have arrived at a version of love that is conditional in ways they have never needed to name because the conditions have never been tested. The other kind requires the conditions to have been tested. Requires the person to have arrived at the understanding that the love is not contingent, is not if you provide this then I give that, but is simply there, simply given, simply what is. This is the rarest thing. This is the story of a woman who had that kind of love, and of a man who knew it, and of the specific deliberate choice he made because he knew it, and of the evening 7 years into a marriage she had believed was one thing, when he sat across from her in their ordinary sitting room and said, "I need to tell you who I actually am. Stay with me," because what she says when he tells her is not what you are expecting. Like this video. Subscribe to African Tales by Charlie if you are new here. Turn on notifications. This story is for everyone who has been loving someone quietly, completely, without requiring the love to produce anything before it continues. Ngozi Obi had married Chukwemeka on a Saturday in August, 7 years before the evening that changed everything. She had been 27. He had been 31. The wedding had been modest, not because either of them had insisted on modesty, not because modesty was performing itself as virtue, but because what they had between them at the time of the wedding was simply what two people of limited means have when they decide to begin a life together. The venue had been the church hall. The food had been prepared by her mother and his aunts, each bringing what they were known for, the specific varieties of dishes that family members bring to occasions when they want to contribute rather than simply attend. The dress had been made by a seamstress in the neighborhood who had been doing good work at reasonable prices for 20 years and who had understood, from the single fitting, what Ngozi wanted and had produced it without excess or shortfall. The photographs existed and were not elaborate. She had not minded any of this. Not in the way that some people do not mind things, the performed not minding of someone swallowing a disappointment and deciding not to name it because naming it would cost too much. She had genuinely not minded. She had looked at the church hall and at the food from the family and at the dress from the neighborhood seamstress, and she had thought, this is the right container for what is in it. The wedding was the container. What she cared about was what the container held. And what the container held was Chukwemeka, who had looked at her across the modest church hall with the specific expression of a man who understood that what was happening was significant and was not going to manage the significance into something smaller. Who was not performing his emotion for the room. Who was simply in it completely the way he was in everything. She had thought, standing there in the seamstress's dress in the church hall decorated by her mother and his aunts. This is exactly right. She had been right that it was right. She had not known, in the full dimensions of the rightness, what she was right about. Chukwemeka worked in procurement. This was what he had told her when they met, through a friend of a colleague at a work function she had almost not attended. She had been tired that Friday evening. A long week at the school, the end of a term, the specific accumulated weight of a teacher at the end of a term who has been fully present every day and is now depleted by the fullness. She had nearly called to say she would not come. She had come anyway, not because she had expected anything from the evening but because the friend had asked her specifically and she did not cancel on people who asked her specifically. He had been standing near the drinks table, talking to someone, in the specific quality of someone who is present in the conversation they are having and is not simultaneously managing their impression on the rest of the room. She had noticed this. It was uncommon. Most people at work functions are having the conversation in front of them while also managing the impression the rest of the room is forming of them. He was not. He was simply in the conversation. He had introduced himself when the mutual friend brought them together. He worked in procurement for a manufacturing company, the specific job that produces in most people's minds the specific image of someone doing important but unremarkable administrative work in a mid-sized company, the kind of work that keeps things running without producing the kind of result that anyone puts on a billboard. He had described it simply and without elaboration. She had received the description without requiring elaboration. She had been more interested in how he described his work than in what the work was. And what she had noticed was that he described it the way a person describes something they have decided to be modest about rather than the way a person describes something they are genuinely modest about. There was a quality of management in how he spoke of the procurement job, as though the procurement job were a costume that fit well enough for ordinary occasions. She had filed this. She had not pressed it. They had talked for the rest of the evening, not performing the conversation, having it. She had gone home and had thought about how rarely she encountered someone who was in the conversation rather than managing their impression during the conversation, and had understood that the quality she had noticed was not incidental but was the quality of the person. They had married 11 months later. They had moved into a flat 3 rooms, a small kitchen, a bathroom, a sitting room with a window that looked onto the compound below. Not elaborate, not inadequate. The flat of 2 people beginning something together, 2 people who had looked at what was available and had decided that what was available was sufficient for what they were starting. She had arranged it with the same quality of care she brought to everything she did, completely, finding value in the doing even when the doing was modest, making the 3 rooms into a place that was genuinely a home rather than simply a place people lived. She had chosen what went where with the specific attention of someone who understands that a space communicates something about the people who inhabit it and who had decided what she wanted their space to communicate. Not elaborateness. Something warmer than that. The specific quality of a place that is entirely itself. He went to work every morning and came home every evening. His hours were consistent. His mood, when he came home, was the mood of someone who had done what they set out to do that day. Not buoyant. He was not a buoyant man in the performed way of people who make their happiness visible to demonstrate it. But settled. The specific settled quality of someone who is doing what they intended to do and is satisfied with the intention and the doing. He asked about her day and listened to the answer. He told her about his day in the specific way of someone who has thought about which parts of the day are worth sharing and has selected those rather than providing the full unedited account. The selection was accurate. She noticed this. He earned, by every visible measure, a reasonable salary. Not generous, reasonable. The kind that kept the household functioning without excess. She had grown up in a household where money was managed carefully rather than abundantly. Her father had been a civil servant, her mother a trader whose business was reliable rather than large, and the household had run on the specific combination of what both of them provided, counted carefully, spent intelligently, never wasted. She understood the managing without requiring it to be explained or apologized for. She managed the household finances with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. She knew what things cost. She knew which vendors were reliable and which ones adjusted their prices based on how they assessed the buyer. She knew how to make the available stretch to cover the needed and how to make the stretching invisible so that the household did not feel like a household that was stretching. This was not a performance either. It was simply who she was. Someone for whom the careful management of what was available was not a hardship but a form of attention, a way of being present in the specific reality of her life rather than in some imagined version of it that had more to offer. She had her own work. She was a secondary school teacher, chemistry, the subject she had loved since the year a teacher whose name she still remembered had shown her that the material world was not random but structured, that there were patterns in the behavior of matter that could be understood and predicted, that underneath the visible surface of things was an order that was waiting to be found. She had loved this with the specific quality of someone who has found the subject that was waiting for them, Not chosen it strategically, not arrived at it by elimination, but found it in the specific moment of recognition that some subjects produce in some people, the moment when the thing being studied and the mind studying it find each other. She taught with the same quality she brought to everything else, completely without the performance of enthusiasm but with the genuine quality of someone who found what they were doing worth doing and communicated this to the students in front of them through the simple fact of being fully in what she was doing rather than half in it. The students who were ready for chemistry found, in her classroom, someone who was fully in the subject. The students who were not ready for chemistry found someone who did not perform disappointment at their unreadiness but continued to offer the subject in the full version until the readiness arrived or the year ended, whichever came first. She was, by every available measure, a good teacher. Her students remembered her. Some of them came back to tell her what they had become, and the things they had become were various, not all of them scientific, because the thing she had given them was not chemistry specifically but the understanding that underneath the visible surface of things was an order waiting to be found, and this understanding transferred. This was the specific satisfaction that her work produced, and she received it with the quiet, private pleasure of someone who does not require their satisfaction to be witnessed by anyone in order for it to be real. Her dream had been to study further. Not to stop teaching. Teaching was not a step on the way to something else for her. But to study further, to develop the specific understanding of chemistry that only sustained formal study produces, to become the kind of teacher who had gone deeper into the subject than the curriculum required and could take students to places the curriculum did not map. She had wanted this since she was a student herself, had wanted it with the specific clarity of someone who understands what they want and understands also that wanting something and having it are two different things and that the gap between them requires specific kinds of work. She had identified the program. She had inquired about the requirements, sent the email, attended the information session, asked the questions about prerequisites and timelines and what the qualification would make available to a working teacher who completed it while continuing to teach. She had received the answers and had understood them completely and had done the final calculation. The cost was what they did not have. Not dramatically did not have. Not in the specific way that a household without food does not have. Simply, the program cost what the household budget did not have available and the shortfall was real, and she had done the calculation from every available angle and the answer had been the same from every angle. Not the time. She had not told Chukwuemeka about the program. This was not because she feared his response. She did not fear his response. It was because she had looked at what was available and had made her calculation and had arrived at an answer, and the answer was, not now. And the not now was hers to carry. Not because she was protecting him from something or performing sacrifice for an audience, but because the not now was a fact, and facts that produce nothing actionable do not require sharing. She had not told him because there was nothing to tell that he could do anything about, and burdening someone you love with what they cannot address is not generosity, it is weight transfer. She did not impose the weight on someone else. She had filed the program in the same interior space where she kept the things that were hers alone. She had gone about the teaching. She had made the household work. She had loved Chukwuemeka in the complete, undemanding way that was, she had long understood, simply how she loved. Not the love that keeps accounts of what it gives and what it receives, but the love that gives because giving is what it does, and receives what it receives without auditing the receiving against the giving. The years had been ordinary in the best way that years can be ordinary. Not empty, not without texture, but unmarked by the specific drama that makes for stories other people tell. They had moved to a slightly larger flat in the 5th year, the same neighborhood, one more room, a kitchen window that looked onto a different angle of the same compound. She had arranged the new flat with the same care she had brought to the first one. He had helped with the moving in the specific way of a man who moves things without requiring credit for the moving. Efficiently, without commentary, the boxes in the places she indicated, the furniture adjusted when she looked at something and indicated with her expression that it was not quite right. They had not had children. This was not a wound, at least it was not only a wound. It was also simply the specific configuration of a life that had not produced children, which is a configuration that many lives take and that does not require explanation beyond itself. They had spoken about it in the way that couples who are honest with each other speak about the things that are neither chosen nor unchosen, directly without performing either grief or acceptance, simply having the conversations that the fact of it required. They had arrived at the specific settled acceptance of people who have looked at their life clearly, and have decided to be present in what is there rather than persistently absent in what is not. The in-laws had been a particular texture of the years. Chukwemeka's mother, Mama Emeka, as she was called by the family and by the neighbors who had known her for long enough to have earned the familiarity, was a woman who had opinions about most things and communicated them with the specific directness of someone who had never seen the value of softening what she thought to protect the feelings of people who were, in her assessment, capable of hearing what was true. She had loved her son with the particular quality of a woman who had made sacrifices for her children, and had maintained a clear and detailed accounting of those sacrifices not to extract payment but to ensure that the love they represented was understood in its full dimensions. She was not a cold woman. She was a woman with high standards and a specific understanding of what her son deserved. Her opinion of Ngozi was complicated. Not hostile. Mama Emeka was not a hostile woman, but specific. She had not, at the time of the marriage, believed that Ngozi was what her son deserved. Not because of anything wrong with Ngozi in any visible dimension. Because of a calculation she had made about what her son's trajectory was going to be and what that trajectory required in a wife, and Ngozi, the chemistry teacher, the careful household manager, the woman who did not require things, had not matched what the calculation produced. The calculation had expected someone with more visible ambition, more evident drive toward the particular form of success that Mama Emeka understood as success. Ngozi's particular form of success, the students who came back, the household managed with care, the love that did not require things, was not the form Mama Emeka's calculation had been running on. She had communicated this opinion not in statements, she was too careful for statements, but in the specific quality of her attention to Ngozi. The slightly shorter greetings, the slightly quicker movements past her in a room, the conversations that were directed to Chukwemeka and included Ngozi only when inclusion was unavoidable. The specific quality of a woman who is present at the gathering and has decided that a particular person at the gathering is peripheral to the gathering's real business. Ngozi had received all of this with the specific quality she brought to everything she received. Completely, without addition and without subtraction, simply what was there. She had not complained to Chukwemeka, not because she feared his response but because what Mama Emeka communicated was what it was, and receiving it required only the receiving, not the involving of someone else in the receiving. She had her own relationship with her mother-in-law, not warm, not cold, the specific relationship of two people who have assessed each other honestly and have arrived at a mutual understanding that is not affection but is not hostility either. A mutual understanding of what the other person was. This understanding was, in its own way, a form of respect. She had continued to treat Mama Emeka with the same quality of respect she brought to everything and everyone. Not performed respect, the genuine variety that attaches to a person you may not be close to but whose place in the life of someone you love gives them a specific kind of claim on your care. She had cooked the dishes she knew Mama Emeka preferred when Mama Emeka came to visit. She had listened when Mama Emeka spoke. She had responded to what Mama Emeka had actually said rather than to what Mama Emeka had implied. She had maintained this consistently across 7 years, in the specific way of someone who has decided what they are going to be regardless of what they receive in return. This was not easy. She had not required it to be easy. She had simply continued to do it. There had been one specific occasion in the 4th year that she carried differently from the others. A family gathering, the specific kind that extended families hold when there is a reason to gather and everyone comes and the conversation covers the ordinary range of family business, and then sometimes moves past the ordinary range into territory that the occasion was not officially designed to cover. Mama Emeka had been in conversation with 2 of the aunts. Ngozi had been nearby, arranging food, present but not in the conversation. She had heard Mama Emeka say, in the specific tone of someone who believes they are not being overheard, "I love my son. I just wonder sometimes whether this is the life he was supposed to have." She had continued arranging the food. She had not looked up. She had received what she had heard with the same completeness she brought to everything she received, filed it in the appropriate interior space, and continued with the arranging. She had not told Chukwemeka, not that evening, not in the days after, not in the months that followed. The sentence was Mama Emeka's. It was not hers to carry into the space between herself and her husband. She had kept it in the interior space where she kept the things that were hers alone. She had thought about whether to tell him. She had thought about it carefully, the way she thought about things that required careful thought. Not quickly, not in the heat of the feeling, but in the quieter days after, when the feeling had settled and the thinking was available. She had arrived at the conclusion that telling him would serve her but not the situation. He would feel the specific kind of pain that a son feels when he understands that his mother has said something that diminishes the person he loves. The pain would be his to carry. She would have transferred her weight to him. This was not generosity. She did not transfer weight. She had kept it. She had set it in the interior space and had continued. The extended family had a similar texture. Uncles and aunts and cousins who had opinions about the marriage and communicated them in the specific ways that extended families communicate opinions about the marriages of their members, in comments that were not quite direct enough to be addressed, in observations that were not quite criticism enough to be defended against, in the particular quality of warmth that is extended to a person who is accepted but not entirely welcomed. The specific difference between welcome and acceptance is a difference most people feel without being able to name. Ngozi had been in enough rooms to name it. She had continued to show up. At the family gatherings and the occasions and the celebrations and the ordinary visits that maintained the infrastructure of a family's shared life. She had brought food and had helped and had been present without requiring her presence to be acknowledged in any particular way. She had done this not to perform virtue for an audience but because it was who she was, someone for whom showing up was simply what you did, regardless of whether the showing up produced anything visible. Chukwuemeka watched all of this. He watched his mother's particular quality of attention toward Ngozi, and he watched Ngozi receive it without complaint. He had never heard Ngozi say a negative word about his mother. Not once in 7 years. This was not the silence of suppression. He knew the difference between someone not saying something because they had suppressed it and someone not saying something because they had genuinely processed it and set it down. Ngozi had processed and set down. The setting down was visible in the quality of how she continued to show up. He watched the extended family's particular warmth and he watched Ngozi show up anyway. He watched her manage the household with the specific care of someone making something with limited materials and finding value in the making. He watched her go to the school each morning and come home each evening and grade papers at the kitchen table at night. The red pen, the exercise books, the specific concentrated quality of someone doing the work of a teacher at the end of a long day who is still fully in the work because the work matters. He watched her go to the information session for the program in the 3rd year. He had not known at the time that she was going. She had told him she had a meeting at the school. He had found out afterward, not through surveillance but through the specific quality of the brochure he had found in the interior drawer of the small desk in the bedroom that she used for her private papers. He had opened the drawer looking for a pen and had found the brochure. He had read it, not completely but enough to understand what it was and what registering for it would require and what it would produce. He had understood from the brochure and from the calculation he ran in his own head exactly why she had not registered. He had put the brochure back in the drawer, exactly as he had found it, at the same angle with the same fold. He had not told her he had found it. He had told himself he would tell her when he was ready to tell her everything. The finding of the brochure had been one of the specific things that had confirmed for him, with the clarity of something that needed no additional argument, that the time would have to come. He had also watched the specific quality of her interaction with his mother across the 4th year gathering, the one where his mother had said what she said. He had not been in earshot, but he had watched Ngozi's posture from across the room and had understood, in the specific way that a man who has been watching someone for years understands things, that something had been said and had been received. He had not asked about it. He had filed it. He had watched Ngozi carry the food to the table with the same quality she always brought to the carrying, and he had understood what the carrying cost and had understood also that she was not going to tell him what the carrying cost and that the not telling, the management of the weight so that it did not become his weight, was itself one of the things she gave him that she did not know she was giving. He watched all of this and he understood what he was watching. He was watching the specific quality of a love that does not require anything to sustain it. He had known about this quality before he married her. It was why he had married her. Not because he needed someone who would not require things. That is not a love story, that is a transaction. But because he understood, in the specific way that a man understands who has spent a long time paying attention to the difference between what people present and what they actually are, that what she was real. That what she gave was given because it was who she was and not because of any calculation about what the giving would produce. The love was not contingent. It was not if you provide this then I give that. It was simply there, simply given, simply what she did. He had known this from the first evening, when she had talked to him at the work function with the specific quality of someone who was in the conversation rather than managing their impression during it. He had been watching for that quality for years, for the person who was present in what they were doing rather than performing the being present. He had found it in her, standing near the drinks table on a Friday evening when she had almost not come. He had known this, and he had carried, for 7 years, the specific weight of knowing it alongside the specific weight of the secret he had not told her. The secret was this. Chukwuemeka had grown up in a household that was not wealthy but was not poor in the way that poverty has a single face. His father had been an engineer, a practical man, the kind who understood systems and could explain why things worked the way they worked without requiring the explanation to be impressive. His mother had kept the household with the specific efficiency of a woman who understood that the resources available were finite and that the finite resources required management. He had grown up understanding both things, the systems his father understood and the management his mother practiced. The combination had produced, in him, the specific quality of someone who sees how things are organized and understands both how to maintain the organization and how to change it. He had begun the company at 24, from a single idea about a gap in the logistics infrastructure of the region that everyone he described it to told him was either too small to address or too large to address without significant capital. He had addressed it with the capital he had, which was not significant, and the result of addressing the small version of the problem had been the confidence to address the larger version, and the result of addressing the larger version had been the company. He had been visible in those early years, had been in rooms where his name and what it was becoming were known, had experienced the specific quality of the attention that arrives when a person's trajectory becomes legible to the people around them, had watched what that attention attracted and what it produced, had understood, gradually and then with sudden completeness, that the attention was not for him. Chukwuemeka did not work in procurement for a manufacturing company. He was the manufacturing company. Not that company specifically. The company he had described in the early conversation at the work function had been a plausible fiction, the kind that fits neatly into the shape of a story without requiring verification. The procurement job had existed, in the sense that the company existed and the procurement function existed and a person with his name in a different configuration was listed in the right places. The function was performed by people who reported to him without knowing who he was in the layers of the organization above the layers they could see. What he actually was, in the world that ran parallel to the ordinary sitting room and the 3-room flat and the reasonable salary and the household managed carefully, was the principal shareholder and founding chairman of a logistics and manufacturing group that operated across 4 countries, employed more than 2,000 people, and had been valued, in its most recent formal assessment, at a number that placed it comfortably in the category that the word billion describes. The group had grown during the 7 years of the marriage. He had continued to build it from the position he had occupied when the marriage began, carefully, through the deputy he trusted, through the management team that understood their specific role in the specific separation he maintained. He had built this, or rather, he had begun it before he met Ngozi and had continued to build it during the years of the marriage, from a position that no one in the immediate geography of their shared life had known about. The mechanisms by which this was possible are the mechanisms of a man who has thought carefully about how to separate what he is from how he lives. A different name on the corporate filings, his middle name and his family name, which is common enough to provide reasonable anonymity in the specific contexts where the filings appear. A management team, led by a deputy he had trusted for 12 years and who had understood, from the beginning of the arrangement, what the separation was and why it was being maintained. A personal infrastructure, the specific combination of accounts, addresses, communication channels, and carefully maintained separations that a person of significant means can construct if they have decided that the visible dimensions of their life should not communicate what their actual means are. He had made this choice before he met Ngozi. Not because he was hiding from something or running from something, because he had watched, in the years before he met her, what visible wealth attracted and what it did to the quality of the things it attracted. He had been visible earlier in the building, had been in rooms where his name and what the name represented were known, had experienced the specific quality of the warmth that arrives when a person's means become visible, had watched relationships form around what he was rather than who he was, had understood the distinction between the two with the clarity of someone who has been on both sides of it and found one side significantly less real than the other. He had watched one relationship in particular, a woman he had genuinely cared for, who had genuinely cared for him, he believed, until the full dimensions of what he had became visible. The specific quality of the caring had not changed in any dramatic way. It had simply expanded, in the way that a space expands when it understands how large it can be. The care had become larger and warmer and more present in proportion to what she understood he had. He had watched this happen in real time and had understood what he was watching and had ended the relationship with the specific sadness of someone who cared for a person and understood that what the person cared for was not him. He had wanted to be chosen honestly, not tested, not in the way of someone who designs a test for another person to pass or fail. He had not constructed a situation to evaluate Ngozi. He had simply lived honestly in the configuration he had chosen before he met her, and she had chosen him in that configuration, and he had watched her live in that configuration for 7 years, and what she had given him in those 7 years was the understanding, the specific, confirmed, no longer requiring additional evidence understanding, that what she had chosen was him. He had wanted to live simply because he had found, during the years of building the company, that simple living produced a quality of ordinary life that the visible wealth had been making it harder to access. The 3-room flat and the reasonable salary and the household managed carefully. These had been, for him, not sacrifice but recovery. The recovery of a quality of ordinary that his specific circumstances had been making unavailable. The recovery of the experience of a Tuesday evening being simply a Tuesday evening rather than an occasion that required management of its own significance. And then he had met Ngozi. And Ngozi had loved him. Simply, completely, without auditing what the love produced. She had arranged the flat with care and had managed the household with thoroughness and had gone to the school each morning and had graded papers at the kitchen table at night and had shown up at the family gatherings and had received his mother's particular quality of attention without complaint and without naming it to him. She had found the program brochure and had made her calculation and had filed the brochure in the interior drawer and had not told him. She had heard his mother say, "I wonder sometimes whether this is the life he was supposed to have," and had continued arranging the food and had not named it to him. She had given him 7 years of the specific, complete love that does not require anything to sustain it. And he had known, for 7 years, that the time would come when he would sit across from her in the ordinary sitting room and tell her who he actually was. He had known it would come. He had been waiting for the certainty that what he was seeing was what he thought he was seeing. In the 7th year he had had the certainty for long enough to know it was not going to change. The weight of the not telling had become the one thing too heavy to carry past the specific evening when it finally tipped. The time had come. It was a Wednesday evening in October. He had come home at the usual time. She had been in the kitchen, preparing dinner, the radio at the low volume she kept it at when she was doing something that required some attention. The specific domestic quality of a weekday evening that was indistinguishable from 1,000 other weekday evenings. She could tell from the sound of the door that it was him and from the quality of the way he moved through the flat that the evening was going to be different from other evenings, because the way he moved through the flat was the way he moved when he was carrying something he was about to set down. The specific quality of a person whose weight is about to change. She had known, in the interior filing system that had been running for 7 years, that the setting down was coming. She had known it was coming for longer than she could precisely identify. Some part of her had been aware, at the edge of her awareness, that there was something in the space between them that had been waiting. She had not pressed it. She had simply known it was there and had waited for it to arrive in its own time. She had not known what was going to be set down. He had sat across from her at the kitchen table. Not the sitting room, not the formal space, the kitchen table, the center of the ordinary life they had built. The table where she graded papers and where they ate their meals and where the ordinary conversations of an ordinary life had been had for 7 years. He had said, "I need to tell you who I actually am." She had looked at him. She had said, "Tell me." He had told her. He had told her everything, not in summary, not in the managed version that communicates the essential facts while softening their implications, not in the version that begins with an apology and buries the substance of the apology in the form of it. He had told her completely, the way a person tells the full truth when the full truth has been owed for a long time and the owing of it has become the heaviest thing they carry. The company, the 4 countries, the 2,000 employees, the valuation, the mechanisms by which the separation had been maintained, the deputy, the different name on the filings, the woman before Ngozi and what that had taught him, why he had made the choice he had made before he met her, what he had found in the first evening at the work function, what he had been watching during the 7 years of the marriage, the brochure in the 3rd year, the specific quality of what he had understood about what he was watching, what it had meant to him, what she had given him without knowing she was giving it. He told her all of it. She listened to all of it without speaking. She listened in the way she listened to everything that mattered, completely without preparing her response, without managing her expression, simply receiving what was said. When he finished, there was a silence that was neither empty nor comfortable, the specific silence of a room containing something very large that has just arrived and is waiting to be responded to. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "How long have you been carrying this?" He said, "Since before we met." She said, "It must have been heavy." He said, "It was the heaviest thing I have owned for 7 years. You are the only thing that was heavier." She looked at him for a long moment, the look she gave to everything that mattered, the complete receiving without addition or subtraction. She said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to answer it honestly." He said, "Ask." She said, "Was any of it real? The ordinary life, the 3 rooms, the reasonable salary, the household managed carefully. Was any of it real or was all of it constructed for my benefit?" He said, "The company was always real. The wealth was always real. Everything else, the ordinary life, the 3 rooms, the managing carefully, that was also real. That was not constructed for you. That was how I had been living before I met you, and it is how I wanted to continue living because it was the only life in which the ordinary things were still available to me. The ordinary things had been taken from me by the visible wealth and I had decided to take them back. That decision was mine before you. What you gave me was the understanding that the decision was right. You gave me 7 years of confirmation that what I had chosen was the right thing to have chosen. I am not sure you know what that has meant." She was quiet for another long moment. She said, "The program." He said, "I know about the program." She said, "How long have you known?" He said, "Since the 3rd year. I found the brochure. I put it back." She said, "Why did you not tell me?" He said, "Because telling you would have required telling you everything. And I was not ready to tell you everything in the 3rd year. I needed more time to be certain that what I was seeing was what I thought I was seeing. And I was not going to tell you part of the truth and leave you in a half-truth. The full truth or nothing." She said, "And are you certain now?" He said, "I have been certain for 4 years. The last 4 years I have been carrying the certainty alongside the weight of the not telling, and the weight of the not telling became something I could no longer carry past tonight." She looked at him. She said, "The program is still available." He said, "I know." She said, "I would like to do the program." He said, "I know that too." She said, "I am not saying it because of the wealth. I want to be clear about that. I am saying it because I decided when I filed the brochure in the 3rd year that when the time came I would do it. The time has come. The reason the time has come has nothing to do with what you have just told me. The program was always mine. The wealth is yours. I will not confuse them." He said, "I know that also." She said, "Then we understand each other." He said, "We have always understood each other. That was the point." She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I have one more thing to say and I need you to hear it the way you have been hearing things for 7 years. He said, "I am listening." She said, "I am not angry. I want to be clear about that. I have sat with this for the last few minutes and I have thought about whether I should be angry and I have considered it carefully and I am not. The secret was yours to tell when you were ready and you were not ready until tonight and tonight you told me. You did not tell me in pieces, you told me completely, which means when you were ready you were truly ready. The 7 years were real. The love was real. The ordinary life was real. None of that becomes less real because there was something underneath it that I did not know. What is underneath things does not make what is on the surface less real. It makes it more precisely what it is." She paused. She said, "But I need you to know that I did not love you because you had nothing. I want to be very precise about this. I loved you because of who you are, because of how you are present in things, because of the quality of your attention and the honesty of what you have said during the 7 years and the consistency between what you said and what you did. The wealth is yours. It has always been yours. It does not become part of what I love because it does not need to. What I love is the same as it was at 8 o'clock this morning. It will be the same at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. He looked at her. He said, I know. She said, good. He said, Ngozi. She said, yes. He said, the program starts in January. She said, I know when it starts. He said, I would like you to do it. She said, I have already decided to do it. He said, I know. I am saying it anyway, because it was yours and you deferred it, and I have been watching you defer it for 4 years since I found the brochure, and I want to say plainly, it is time. She looked at him with the same expression she had given him across the modest church hall 7 years ago in the seamstress's dress. The expression that said, this is exactly right. She said, make tea. He made tea. They sat at the kitchen table, the ordinary table, the center of the ordinary life, the table that was the same table it had always been, and they were quiet together in the specific way of people who have just said something very large and are resting in the having said it. The radio was still on at its low volume. The evening was doing what Wednesday evenings do. Nothing had changed and everything had changed, and the specific quality of the nothing changed, everything changed was the quality of the kitchen table with the 2 cups of tea on it and the 2 of them at it, exactly as they had always been. Now I want to stop here for a moment, because what just happened at that kitchen table is for everyone who has been sitting at their own version of the ordinary table, loving quietly and asking nothing, carrying a program in an interior drawer, waiting for the time that was right. If that is you, if you recognize something in Ngozi's 7 years, I need you to leave a comment below before the closing thought. Tell me where you are. Tell me what is in your interior drawer. Tell me what you have been carrying that no one knows about. Like this video. Subscribe to African Tales by Charlie, because the closing thought of this story is the one I most need you to carry with you. Because the most important thing that happened on that Wednesday evening in October was not the revelation of the wealth. The wealth is the consequence of who he was, not the source of what she loved. She said this plainly and she meant it, and it was true. She had not loved him because he had nothing. She had loved him because of who he is. And who he is had not changed on that Wednesday evening. The Wednesday evening had simply added a dimension she had not previously known was there. The most important thing that happened on that evening was what she said before she said make tea. I am not angry. The 7 years were real. The love was real. The ordinary life was real. None of that becomes less real because there was something underneath it that I did not know. That is the whole of the evening. The wealth changed the practical dimensions of her life. It did not change anything about her. She was still the woman who had graded papers at the kitchen table and managed the household with what was available and shown up at the family gatherings and received her mother-in-law's particular quality of attention without complaint and without naming it to him. She was still the woman who had found the program brochure and made her calculation and filed it without telling anyone and waited. She was still the woman whose love did not require anything to sustain it. The wealth did not make her that woman. She had always been that woman. The wealth simply confirmed what he had known for 7 years, that the woman who had loved him in the ordinary sitting room with the reasonable salary and the household managed carefully was the woman worth building a life with, the woman worth coming home to, the woman worth the 7 years of carrying. Tell me in the comments, have you ever loved someone completely without requiring the love to produce anything? Have you ever carried a dream in the interior space without telling anyone, waiting for the time that was right? Tell me where you are. I read every one. Like this video. Subscribe to African Tales by Charlie, because the closing thought is the one that matters most. So here is what I want to leave you with. Somewhere right now there is Ngozi, a woman or a man who is loving someone completely and asking nothing of the love, who is managing what is available with the care that makes the available feel like abundance, who is going to work every morning and coming home every evening and finding value in the doing even when the doing is modest, who has received things without complaint that they had every right to name and have chosen not to name them because the naming would serve no purpose that the silence could not serve better, who has a program in an interior drawer, a dream they have calculated and deferred and filed without telling anyone, waiting for the time that is right. They believe that what they are doing is invisible. They are wrong about the invisible. There is someone watching. There is always someone watching. Not in the sense of surveillance, in the sense of a person who is paying the specific quality of attention that love pays when it is paying attention honestly. The person beside them is watching, has been accumulating evidence year by year of who the person who loves them without condition actually is, has been understanding with increasing certainty what they are in the presence of. And God is watching too. The ordinary days are not invisible to God. Not the grading of papers at the kitchen table. Not the showing up to the gathering where the warmth is incomplete. Not the food cooked for the person who communicates the slightly shorter greeting. Not the program brochure in the interior drawer. None of it invisible. All of it noted. All of it part of the picture of who you are, the truest picture, the one that is drawn by the accumulation of ordinary days rather than by the performance of significant moments. The time does not arrive because the circumstances became easier. The circumstances do not always become easier. The time arrives because something that was owed for a long time is finally paid. Because someone who has been watching sits across the kitchen table and says, "I need to tell you who I actually am." Because the weight of the not telling becomes the one thing too heavy to carry past tonight. And when that happens, when the sitting across the table and the telling and the receiving of the telling happens, the person who had the program in the interior drawer does what Ngozi did. She does not reach for the wealth. She reaches for the program. Because the program was always hers. It was always waiting. The wealth is the practical circumstance that makes the waiting end. But the program, the dream deferred and filed and maintained in the interior space without complaint, that was hers from the beginning. That did not depend on the wealth to become real. It was already real. It was simply waiting for the time that was right. God does not waste the ones who love completely and ask for nothing. God does not waste the programs in the interior drawers. The time comes. It always comes. Not always in the form you expected. Not always in the shape you imagined when you filed the dream and went back to the ordinary work of your ordinary days. But it comes. The table is being set even when you cannot see the table being set. The preparation is underway even when the preparation is invisible. The person sitting across from you at the kitchen table knows more about who you are than you have told them. They have been watching. They have been understanding. They have been waiting for the right moment to say, "I know. I have always known. And it is time. Keep the dream. Keep showing up. Keep loving completely and asking nothing. Keep grading the papers at the kitchen table and cooking the food and receiving what you receive with the completeness of someone who is not going to let what they receive determine who they are. The table is being set. You will sit at it. That is the whole of it. If this story found you today, if some part of it sat in your chest in a way that felt like recognition, leave a comment below. Tell me where you are. Tell me what is in your interior drawer. Tell me what you have been loving quietly, asking nothing. Like this video if it moved something in you. Share it with someone who has been loving quietly and asking nothing and needs to be reminded that the love is seen. Subscribe to African Tales by Charlie. I will see you in the next one.